Okay, so you have a 30-second joke at the Grammys, and then less than 24 hours later, you have a 300-word legal threat from the President of the United States. Let's get into this, because this story isn't just about a comedian and a politician. It's about how defamation law can be used as a weapon, and how it can create a legal minefield that might just expose way more than anyone ever bargained for. So let's set the scene. It's the Grammys. Trevor Noah is up there hosting for the very last time. He makes this joke, connecting Donald Trump's old idea about buying Greenland with all the news swirling around Jeffrey Epstein. The crowd laughs. It's pretty standard stuff for a comedian, a little satirical jab. He even says, "I told you it's my last year, what are you going to do about it?" Well, he was about to find out. Not even a full day later, this message drops on Truth Social. And it's not just a casual dismissal, right? This is a direct threat. He calls Noah a total loser and a talentless dope, sure. But the key part is that promise of a lawsuit. He says he's going to have some fun with him in court. The message couldn't be clearer. That joke was not received well. Now, right off the bat, pretty much any lawyer will tell you that a comedian making a joke about a public figure is one of the most protected forms of speech we have in the United States. So a lawsuit like this seems completely doomed to fail from the start. And that begs the real question. If this isn't about actually winning in court, then what is it really about? Okay, so to really understand the strategy at play, we first have to break down why the legal case itself is just so incredibly weak. It all comes down to the huge protections the First Amendment gives to free speech, especially when you're talking about powerful people. So here's the key thing to understand. The legal standard for proving defamation is totally different depending on who you are. If you're a private citizen, you really just have to prove that someone said something false about you and that it was damaging. But for a public figure, like a president, there's a whole other level. You have to prove something called actual malice. And actual malice is a legal term. It doesn't just mean the person was being mean or had ill intent. It has a very specific definition. Trump's lawyers would have to somehow prove that Trevor Noah, a comedian telling a joke, either knew his satire was a factual lie or that he was just completely reckless about whether it was true or not. For a joke, that is an almost impossible bar to clear. And this idea is backed up by some serious legal history. There was a huge Supreme Court case back in 1988, Hustler Magazine versus Falwell. The court basically said, unanimously, that parody and satire, no matter how harsh or offensive, are protected. As long as a reasonable person wouldn't think it's an actual statement of fact, it's not defamation. This case essentially created a giant legal shield for exactly the kind of thing Trevor Noah did. So, if we know the lawsuit itself is pretty much a legal non-starter, why threaten it in the first place? This brings us right back to our main question. The goal here isn't to win a verdict in a courtroom. The goal is something else entirely. And this gets us to the first part of the real strategy. It's a concept that lawyers and journalists are all too familiar with. It's about using the legal system itself as a weapon to create what's known as a chilling effect on free speech. See, this isn't just a one-off threat. It's part of a very clear pattern. For example, he recently got a $15 million settlement from ABC News. Why? Because George Stephanopoulos said on air that a court found Trump liable for rape when the specific legal term was sexual abuse. And it happened again with CBS. They ended up paying a $16 million settlement related to an edit in a 60 Minutes interview. So you add that up, that's $31 million from two of the biggest news networks in the world. And they didn't settle because they thought they would lose in court. They settled because fighting a lawsuit for years and years is unbelievably expensive and disruptive. And that's the core of the strategy. The process is the punishment. You put your critics, whether it's a giant news network or a single comedian, in a tough spot. You can either spend millions of dollars and years of your life on lawyers to defend your right to speak, or you can just settle and be quiet. And that makes everyone else think twice before they criticize you. That's the chilling effect. But there's a second piece to this puzzle, and it's all about the timing. This threat didn't just happen in a vacuum. It is directly tied to the recent explosive release of the Epstein files. Just look at this timeline. It's pretty telling. On January 30th, the Justice Department releases a mountain of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein. 2 days later, Trevor Noah tells his joke on a massive stage. And then, the very next morning, Trump threatens to sue. That timing is no accident. This is all about controlling the story. Before this threat, the headlines were all about what might be in those Epstein files. Accusations that information was being held back. After the threat, the conversation completely shifts. Now Trump isn't on defense anymore. He's on offense, painting himself as the victim of the media and some talentless dope. It's a classic way to change the subject. But, and this is a really big but, this whole strategy has one enormous risk, a massive potential to backfire. Because if Trump actually files this lawsuit, he walks right into a legal process that could blow up in his face. It's called discovery. So for anyone who's not familiar, discovery is the part of a lawsuit where things get very, very real. It's when both sides get the legal power to demand evidence from each other. We're talking documents, emails, texts, phone records, everything. And they can question people under oath in what are called depositions. It's designed to get all the facts on the table before a trial. So what does that mean in this case? Well, if Trump sues Trevor Noah over an Epstein joke, Noah's lawyers could legally demand all of this. They could subpoena every text message, every email. They could demand the complete flight logs from Epstein's jet. They could force Trump to sit for a deposition under oath for hours or even days and ask him about his entire relationship with Epstein. This lawsuit would open a legal Pandora's box. And here's the thing, they wouldn't just be fishing in the dark. We already know from those documents that were just released by the DOJ that Trump's name appears over 3,000 times. That includes testimony, emails, and even a prosecutor's note saying he flew on Epstein's jet more than we knew. That would be the starting point for discovery, not the end. Okay, so let's pull back for a second. This whole conflict, this threat over a single joke, it has consequences that go way beyond just these two people. It really gets to the heart of free speech and how we hold powerful people accountable. This quote comes from another foundational Supreme Court case, New York Times versus Sullivan, and it's so important. The court basically said that for our democracy to work, there has to be breathing space for public debate. That means we have to protect even really harsh, nasty, and unpleasant criticism of our leaders, because the alternative is a country where people are just too scared to speak up. And that's the real tension we're seeing play out here. On one side, you have the absolute need to hold public figures accountable. But on the other, you have the use of these incredibly expensive lawsuits to silence the very people, the journalists, the comedians, the critics, who do that work. This strategy lives in that gray area between what the law says it protects and what people can actually afford to defend in the real world. Which leaves us with a really critical question, not just about this case, but about our democracy. In a world where a legal threat can be a political weapon, where do we draw the line between protected satire and punishable defamation? And maybe even more important, who gets to draw that line? Should it be judges in a courtroom, or should it be powerful people who just didn't like the joke?